Great. Good morning. I guess it's still morning. And we're continuing on with our series on, it's on? Yeah, it says it's on. Eco-theology. Next week, we are welcoming Professor Mari Jorstad. And Mari is Professor of Old Testament and also the Academic Dean at Vancouver School of Theology in Canada, Vancouver, which is, I think, British Columbia, isn't it? Vancouver. It is British Columbia, isn't it? She was from Canada also. We had our two Canadians here today. We have a preacher from Canada today. So this is our Canada Days. And Mari will be talking about her work in Hebrew Bible and its relationship to eco-theology. And especially, I think she's going to be dealing with the prophet Elisha. And Prophet Elisha is not somebody I had ever thought about in terms of eco-theology, but she's going to tell us about that. So that should be interesting. And then the week after that, we have Seeds of Hope from our diocese. We're having, oh my gosh, I'm blocking on his name. Tim Alderson, thank you, Lynn. Tim Alderson, who is the director of Seeds of Hope in our diocese, talking about sort of on the ground, how we deal with food justice issues and hopefully talking about some broader issues of agriculture and food production. So that's going to be on the 17th. But today we're going to doing something of a deep dive on one particular Bible story. We're going to be looking at the story of Noah and the flood and the ark. It's probably one of the stories of the Bible that most everybody culturally knows. If you go into our nursery, you'll see a very cute little depiction of Noah's ark with all the animals, and it tends to be seen often as a children's story. But when we look at the actual real story, it's sort of a text of terror in some ways, because it's the destruction of the whole world. And so we're going to see today if we can mine some of the images and the symbols of this story to be a story both of warning and of hope. So if we could move to the PowerPoint, please, Kelsey.
It wasn't a Princess Cruise.
No, it was not. So just take a second here to get the PowerPoint up. Okay, we have a little bit of a problem here. There it is. Hey, there we are. So again, what I'm subtitling this look at Noah and the flood is a story of warning and hope, because I think both of those things are in it for us. I mean, it's not just a lovely story in the Bible, or not so lovely story, but it's a story for us. And what can we take from this story? And how can it be both a sign of warning and a sign of hope for us? Next slide, please, Kelsey. Thank you. So today we're going to do four things. We're going to look at the context of in all these in relatively short order, right? We're going to do look at the context of the story in its cultural context. We're going to look at the text of the story in its context in Genesis, especially how it relates to the creation stories that occur a few chapters earlier. We're going to take a look at our environmental context very briefly again, but then also seeing how does this story provide us with those images of warning and hope. First of all, let's take a look at the context of this story. Before we get to the ancient cosmology, which you see there on your screen, let's remind ourselves about what these what are sometimes called prehistory stories in the Bible. That is, the stories of creation all the way through the story of Noah, the Tower of Babel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That the purpose of these stories is not to narrate history. It's to give us mythic imaginations to help us to navigate our own world. And that's what really the people who brought us the Bible were doing. That they were operating in their own cultural context, in this case with the stories of ancient Babylon all around them, especially the folks who went into the exile. The stories in the book of Genesis, as they finally appear in our Bible, come to us during the period of exile, right? In the fifth century, before the birth of Christ, the period of the exile, they come back to the promised land. And it's during that period that the final forms of the stories that we have are put into a version that we have, like the Bible as we understand it, right? The book of Genesis as we understand it, for example. Now, that's not to say that those stories are much more ancient in terms of their oral tradition, right? But if we were to think about how would an ancient person view the world, how would they, what would their sort of cosmology be? What would their science be, right, in their own day? Now, we have science in our time, and we might sometimes think, oh, well, you know, those poor benighted ancient people, you know, had this weird view of science, and we know better now. Well, we do know better now, but I think we need to say that we still don't know everything, right? My guess is that in 500 years from now, they're going to look back at us and say, oh, those poor people in the 21st century, they really didn't understand it, right? So when we look at an image like this, we have to allow ourselves the sort of humility of our own context. But that's to say, when the ancient peoples thought of the world, the cosmos, they probably had in mind something similar to this. So there's something of you see that sort of like arch, right? And the firmament of the stars. But there was a thought that was actually sort of a solid thing, the firmament, right? And in fact, that even the language that's used in Hebrew is to like something that is like flattened out like a piece of copper or silver into a thin layer, so that it was actually a solid dome, right? And that's how come you see some of the Psalms, like the dome of heaven, things like that, the pillars of the earth. You hear those images in the Psalms, because the earth was held up by pillars, and there was a primeval ocean underneath the world. And you hear, if we went to the book of Genesis, we would remember that God separated the waters above the heaven with the waters beneath the heavens, right? And dry land appeared. So the earth is there, and you have this firmament, and you have the stars, and you have the waters above the firmament, which pour down, and then you have the ability of waters from below could foreseeably bubble up as well. And we're going to see that in the book of Genesis, or in the story of Noah, I should say. So this is just a sense of how ancient peoples may have understood their universe. Okay, we can go to the next slide then. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on a lot of this stuff, since we have many other things that you know. But that's just to say, if you could look that up more if you want to know more about all that, right? There's the now the flood story that we have. Is it unique? No, it isn't unique. There are many cultures that have ancient flood stories, but in particular, the thing that influences the story in the Bible is probably an ancient Babylonian epic called the story of Atarhasis. Now there's also an ancient story called the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is also Babylonian, but it probably owes its origin also to the Atarhasis story. We're going to talk about what the Atarhasis story is. And then there's the flood story in Genesis. Both of those probably borrow from this more ancient Atarhasis story, which is an ancient Mesopotamian Babylonian story of a flood. So we can move on to the next one there. And just stop me if you have any questions as we're going through. But the point of this is just to set a context anyway, right? So what are the Atarhasis flood story tell us? Well, there's the gods believed that the humans were too numerous and noisy. They thought, why did we make these people? They were made, now mind you, the human beings were made to be slaves for the gods, to provide farming and grain and sacrifices for the gods. If you remember, I believe it was last week, we're told about the Egyptian stories about how so above, so below, right? That you have on earth, you have a ruling class, elites, priests, etc., and the rest of society serves them, right? And in the same way, humans serve the gods and they're slaves of the gods. But the problem was there were too many of them after a while, and they were very noisy, and the gods couldn't get any sleep. So Atarhasis, whose name means the exceedingly wise one, is warned of the plan of the gods to bring a devastating deluge. And the god Anki warns Atarhasis about this. And he tells him, go ahead and tear down your house and build an ark with it so that you'll be saved, you and your family will be saved from this great flood. So Atarhasis builds the ark, he seals it with bitumen, which we read in the book of Genesis also that Noah uses to seal the ark, which is kind of like a sealant. He puts a roof on it so that the rain doesn't get inside, and he creates upper and lower decks. And then he loads all the animals in 2 by 2 into the ark, and then he seals the door behind him so that it's watertight. The flood, instead of 40 days and 40 nights, the flood continues for 7 days. And Atarhasis then realizes that the waters have subsided, sends out a bird to find out, to make sure that it's 3 birds, I think he sends out, to make sure that the flood waters are dispersed. And then he leaves the ark and offers sacrifice to the gods. The gods are so hungry because all of the people that used to serve them aren't doing it anymore, and they've gone a whole week without eating. So they descend like flies, it says, on the sacrifice to devour it. So then the gods wise up and they say, well, we need to have these folks to help us out. So they are allowed to reproduce and repopulate, but in order to serve the gods, and they have limits on their reproductive capabilities, right? Some women are not allowed to have children, for example, and it goes on.
Exactly.
Right. Although there's going to be another flood then, right? Exactly. Well, anyway, that's the story of Atarhasis, right? If you were in that story, right? Okay, so that's the and more ancient Babylonian narrative from which our story emerges, right? So let's take a look in our Bibles at the Genesis flood story. For all intents and purposes, it begins in the 5th verse of chapter 6, and it goes through roughly to 9:17. And let's take a look here. Chapter 6:5. Now I'm going to be, you all have different translations. Some of you have the New Revised Standard, some of you have the English Standard, and I'm using our friend Robert Alter's translation. If we remember Robert Alter from several weeks ago, who is with us. And the Lord saw in verse 5, we're not going to read this entire thing, but we're going to scatter through it. Okay. And the Lord saw that the evil of the human creature was great on the earth, and that every scheme of his heart's devising was only perpetually evil. And the Lord regretted having made the human on earth and was grieved to the heart. And the Lord said, I will wipe out the human race I created from the face of the earth, from human to cattle to crawling thing, to the fowl of the heavens, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And then we find out that he has three sons here. And he was blameless. So he warns, so God warns Noah, and he tells him how to build an ark. And he tells him the very specific things, how big to build it, what to do with it. And then now I want you to notice that here too, in chapter 6, we have I'm about to bring a flood on the earth. This is verse 17, to destroy all flesh. Has in it the breath of life from under the heavens. Everything in the earth shall perish. And I will set up my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your wives of your sons with you, and with all that lives from all flesh. 2 of each thing you shall bring to the ark to keep alive with you, male and female they shall be. So we hear the tip. This is the traditional thing, 2 by 2, the animals going in the ark 2 by 2, right? Now, if we go further into chapter 7, and yes,
Why do we think that this story was a derivative or influeed by the other story?
because of the similarities, the tremendous similarities textually and in the storyline itself. The Adahara story is much older than the Genesis account would have been. So the Genesis story was probably if you take a common story, for example, like, I don't know, let me think of what would be a common like folk tale, right? What's that? Cinderella. Okay, Cinderella. And you took Cinderella and you sort of reworked it for in your own community and your own faith purpose, right? Or whatever it is, Cinderella, but you know what we're saying, right? That's what is probably going on here. And because the Adarhasa story is older than both the Epic of Gilgamesh, as far as scholars know, and the flood story.
For example, God's displeasure with humans.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that would be sort of a theme, right? Yeah, that would be in both of them. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the purposes are
The purposes are different and the story itself are different, right? The image of who God is, what people are supposed to do, that there's a taking of this other story and reworking it in the same way that, if you recall, when we talked about the creation story, the creation story, human beings are made in the Mesopotamian creation story, human beings are made to serve the gods, and it's a creation born out of violence. Right. The Bible's creation story turns that totally on its head and rethinks it, saying, no, that's what you all think. That's not what we believe as the people of Israel. We think of God in a different way. We think of all of us as being created in the image of God, not just the elites or the priests or whomever. And that was what gosh, what was our top speaker last week? I blocked on her name. Sylvia, thank you. Sylvia was talking to us about last week. Similar thing in this kind of a story here. So if you look though in chapter 7, and the Lord said to Noah, come into the ark, you and all your household, for it is you I have seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean animal, take you 7 pairs, each with its mate. So first of all, we get 2 by 2 in the first section, and then we have 7 pairs in this other section. Now, why is that? Well, this goes back to the fact that this is the wonderful thing about these stories. And I want to point that out because what the authors have done is woven together various strands into a tapestry. So you have this Adahasa story. They use that as some of it. They use another tradition in the Jewish tradition where it's 2 by 2. And then they have another tradition where there's 7 pairs. And they don't discard any of it. They just take all of it and put it together and meld it together. What biblical scholars say is that there's 2 different strands of the tradition. The pairs that talk about sacrifices probably comes to us from the priestly tradition. And the other, the previous one is from probably from another one of the traditions that are all woven together in the Hebrew Bible. So just to raise that, to simply say that the Bible as we have it comes to us from all these different places. And the wonderful thing about the editors of the book of Genesis and the other books of the Hebrew Bible is that they were expert storytellers. They were able to take all these different things and weave them together into the story that we have now. So we have all of these pairs of animals coming into the ark, right? We find out that Noah is 600 years old when the flood came. It says he's old. And it happened in verse 10 that after 7 days, now in this case, the 7 days happened before the flood, right? That the waters of the flood were over the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the well springs of the great deep burst and the casements of heaven were open. So in other words, remember that picture of the firmament, right? So all of the waters below burst up from below, and all the waters from above burst down from above. So it's not just like rain, it's like they're getting it from both directions, right? So it's a great flood. And all flesh, verse 19, and the waters surged most mightily over the earth, and all the high mountains under the heavens were covered. 15 cubits above them, the waters surged as the mountains were covered, and all flesh that stirs on the earth perished. The fowl and the cattle and the beasts and all the swarming things that swarm upon the earth and all humankind, all that had the quickening breath of life in its nostrils, of all that was on the dry land died. And he wiped out all existing things from the face of the earth, from humans to cattle to crawling things to the fowl of the heavens. They were wiped out from the earth. By the way, I guess fish are nicer or better, right? So they don't get killed because they live in the water, right? And Noah alone remained, and those with him in the ark. And the water surged over the earth 150 days. So after the flood, right, there's a surging of the water for 150 days. And then God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark. And God sent out a wind over the earth, and the water subsided. And so Noah has to wait, right? A few days, a certain number of days. And then he sends out a dove, comes back to him, sends it out again, it comes back to him. Finally, he has a little green shoot in its mouth that indicates that maybe there's some life coming back. And then finally the bird doesn't come back. And then he realizes he then finally is brave enough to open up the roof and find out, yes, okay, we can maybe get out of the ark. And they then and Noah went out and his sons, verse 18 of chapter 8. And his sons' wives with him, every beast, every crawling thing, every fowl, everything that stirs on the earth by their families came out of the ark. And Noah built an altar to the Lord, and he took from every clean cattle and every clean fowl and offered them offerings on the altar. Now, mind you, notice that there is no descent like flies on this offering, but we do hear, and the Lord smelled the fragrant odor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again damn the soil on humankind's score. For the devising of human heart are evil from their youth. So the story begins with that, right? And the story comes to an end with the same, God still musing on the nature of human evil. And I will not again strike down all living things as I did, as long as all the days of the earth. Seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. And then we find out that people are allowed to eat the flesh of animals, whereas before that was not something that, they were vegetarians theoretically before this, and they are then able to eat the flesh of animals, and that animals now also become afraid of human beings, right? So this is not a thing that happens without repercussions. There still is ongoing repercussions, that animals and humans are at enmity with one another after this time. And then he says, I am about to, in verse 8 and 9 of chapter 9, I am about to establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the fowl and the cattle and every beast on the earth with you, all that have come out of the ark, every beast of the earth, and I will establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I set between me and you and every living creature that is with you for everlasting generations. My bow I have set in the clouds to be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. And so when I send clouds over the earth, the bow will appear in the cloud. Then I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living creature of all earth, of all flesh, and the waters will no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will see it, to remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures, all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. So it's not just between God and Noah, but between God and all creation, all created things. God has said, and the sign of that covenant, the hopeful sign, is that sign of the rainbow, that death and destruction will not be God's last word, but rather renewal and new life. Right. So that's the story that we have in the book of Genesis. So you get the next slide, Kelsey, please. Oh, I'm sorry. That icon is from, I could look it up. I just was trying to find something that wasn't cute. What's that? No, this is not. This is I think a more medieval manuscript illumination. It does, yeah, it is kind of like that, right? Yeah. I had never thought of that till you just mentioned that. Yeah, it is kind of like a Chagall'ian look to it. Yeah. When they knew those animals, right? Yeah. There's some donkeys there. There's lions, as you say, right? And in fact, the male lion and the female lion are actually pretty realistic, right? Looks like there might be an elephant maybe at the bottom, and there's a giraffe, a couple of giraffes and gazelles, and yeah. Yes, they are, right? Yeah. I'll have to look up where I found that. I was just looking for something that didn't look cutesy, and yet sort of evoked the images, right, that we're trying to find here. But at the end of the day, it is sort of like, oh, look at all those animals, right? We still have that sense of it, right? Now, mind you, look at the other thing that we can read in this painting is that the water seemed to already be starting, right? And in fact, the text itself says, I can't find exactly the verse right off here now, but when the waters start, the Hebrew actually says they are compelled to come into the ark, because they're sort of like, whoa, it's starting, we better get in here, right? And he seals it up.
In the movie Aaron Aronofsky's Noah,
Noah, yeah.
that's something you see in the movie. And the animals, they just show up.
Yes, right. Isn't that something too, that that God brings them to them?
Yeah.
The unicorns didn't make it, right? According to that song by the Irish Rovers. Exactly. Right. So let's look at now, when we look at this story, let's see it in the context of the creation stories, because there is, as Robert Alter says in his notes, where is it now? That what we learn from the story is that first there is a perversion of creation by humankind, and then a reversal of creation by God. And so there's imagery from the book of Genesis that we can see in the flood story, right? So we hear in Genesis 1 and 2, be fruitful and multiply. So there's a proliferation of people in this story, but that leads to the proliferation of evil, right? So the multiplication of people leads to the multiplication of people, leads to the multiplication of evil, which then causes God to see this grievous corruption on the earth. That 3 times that word corruption is used, by the way, and it's the same Hebrew root as the word destruction. So the world is corrupt, and so God destroys, right? And it's the same Hebrew root. Uh-huh. Say more. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. 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 Mm. Mm. Mm.
So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting too, because if you recall from Sylvia's talk last week, what she reminded us about is that the idea of Jubilee in the Old Testament, right? That all of those inequalities that came about over time then are rescinded, and you start fresh again in the Jubilee year, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in the Bible, it says that likely, we've got a lot of stuff, debts, slaves, and so forth. They didn't like the year Jubilee, and just keep to it.
Right, exactly. Right. Even though it was honored in the breach, as they say, it wasn't necessarily in reality, right?
well, that's one of the reasons some people say religion is the opiate of the people, because if you accept that story that the ruling class is telling you, then you never do anything to try and change what's
Right,
going on.
right. Mhm.
Versus actually really looking at, in this case, this story and reading it for yourself, which is why, in the American South, during slavery, they didn't want slaves to be able to read the Bible for
Right,
themselves.
exactly.
Because if you look at it, you see that there is redemption, there is freedom. Jesus came to set the captive free. And
Mhm,
if you
mhm.
understand that, then you won't be willing to accept that.
Yes. Yep. Genesis 1 and 2 again, right? Day 5 and 6 of creation, God brings forth the fowl and the fish, cattle, crawling things multiply. And then in this story, bring into the ark, even the same sort of language, the fowl, the cattle, crawling things. What was created is now to be destroyed. 2 of each or 7, we're not sure, but still, nevertheless, that those things that were created are now being undone, right? And again, using the same language even. And then creation is a process to undo chaos, separating waters to let the dry land appear. And then in this case, the boundaries break, water from above and below, chaos returns, and the waters now multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. And then the breath of life breathed into the human being in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, and then breath is taken back in the flood story. And if we were to read somebody turn to Psalm 104, 29 and 30 and read that. Whoever can find it first, Psalm 20. Mine is only the Torah here, so I don't have the Psalms in my edition right now. Psalm 104, 29. And 30. Whoever finds it first can just
God has no faith. They are the slaves.
right. So that's the Revised Standard, and the Revised Standard keeps a lot of the thous and these in it. Do we have somebody, the New Revised Standard? What's that read?
When you hide your face, they are to sleep. When you take away their breath, they die. And return to their dust. When you send forth your spirit, they are created.
Right. So this is really what's going on here, right? Remember that word ruach in Hebrew is breath and spirit and wind. It's all three things, depending on the context. So that's it. Ruach, R-U-A, in English transliteration H. It's actually a chet, which is it gives that, like in Bach. So it's ruach.
So what's the difference between ruach and
That's Greek. The Hebrew is ruach, but interestingly, in Greek as well as in Hebrew, it means the same thing again. It's spirit, breath, wind, is pneuma, right? That's why you have pneumatic tools that operate on air power. Same, one word meaning in English, three different things. So God breathes the breath of life into humans and actually all creatures in Genesis, and that breath is taken back here in this story. So it's the reversal of creation, right? So that's just, again, to set the context of how this story is sort of, in a sense, an undoing of creation and a recreating after the flood. Kelsey, can we have the next one? Okay, so now we have the story, right? Now let's look at our own context and just be reminded of the world in which we live right now, right? And I need like things like this that are like really simple, and they're probably like too simplistic. So if anybody's a scientist, forgive me. But what is the greenhouse effect and what are greenhouse gases? We always talk about that, right? So simply put, some sunlight that hits the earth is reflected, and some becomes heat in our atmosphere. Notice that little firmament, by the way, is here of atmosphere, right? We don't see it as solid anymore, but we do have a sense of the firmament, the atmosphere, right? But then CO2 and other gases in the atmosphere trap the heat and keep the earth warm. So that's the greenhouse effect. And if you've ever been in a greenhouse, what's it do? It keeps in the heat, right? And so all the gases that we're producing on the earth causes eventually the temperature of the planet to rise, probably even more quickly than scientists originally thought that it was. And then the next slide, which goes into a little bit more detail here. Here now that we have the understanding of what greenhouse effect is, most of the solar energy from the sun is absorbed by the earth. A small portion is reflected back from the atmosphere. Again, there's the firmament there. Certain harmful gases that are released from objects such as spray cans, refrigerators, have caused a hole in the ozone layer, which makes up part of the Earth's atmosphere. Then to the left over here, the burning of fossil fuels such as oil, coal, causes harmful greenhouse gases to be released into the atmosphere. These fuels are burned by power stations to release energy for the use of powering cars, producing electricity and heating, to name a few. Global warming affects weather conditions and can have effects such as heavier rainfalls, storms, cyclones, tsunamis, and then on the other side, heat waves and droughts. And we see this happening in our own country just this summer, right? With all the droughts in the West, fires, more increased fires in the West, floods and hurricanes in the wetter part. The drier parts are getting drier, the wetter parts are getting wetter. The atmosphere, most of the Earth's heat is a small amount is lost back into space. So we see that the heat sort of bringing, not being able to escape. And then if you look at the bottom layer there, the rise in temperatures of the Earth is causing polar ice caps to melt. This increases the sea level, which means towns and cities are in danger of flooding. And we've seen that, you know, if you were in New York a few years ago, the whole of Midtown, or I'm sorry, of downtown Manhattan was flooded, as an example. You know, places like New Orleans becomes even more common again now that we're, you know, maybe not Katrina, but still pretty bad, right? Yeah, well, that's what they say. Right. Yeah, well, I mean, if they hadn't made the changes, it might have been, you know, closer in terms of its effects. So then also, you know, going into the ocean, corals are unable to survive the rising temperatures of the sea, which means they can no longer give food and shelter for fish. And then melting sea ice in Antarctica means less hunting grounds and habitats for animals such as seals and polar bears. That's only one example of how climate change results in extinction of animal species. And we just saw this week, for example, I don't know if you listened on some of the news shows that there's several bird species that now have officially been recognized as an extinct just this week, right? So this is the situation that we're in. So if we think about, well, you can go on to the next slide, Kelsey, please. Okay, then we have, this is an example of that, right? Wildlife populations worldwide have plummeted. Threats to wildlife and population declined from 1970 to 2010 as an example, right? The wildlife populations have plummeted. Why? Well, because of exploitation of those animals, you know, hunting, et cetera, et cetera. Habitat degradation and change. It's like, you know, rainforests, for example, habitat loss, climate change, invasive species that because these other changes have happened, invasive species come in, pollution and disease. So, you know, habitat degradation and exploitation of animal species are the biggest reasons, but then all these other reasons as well. Population decline from 1970 to 2010. Land species and mammals have declined 39% in that period from 1970 to 2010. Freshwater species, amphibians, 76%, marine species, 39% in that short period of time, the decline in populations. And so this is why we have some species that were lower to begin with becoming extinct. So this is the situation in which we find ourselves. So next slide, please, Kelsey. So, okay, so let's think about this story and looking at our world now, right? So we have a story about a flood where all the animals are destroyed, is our current situation a lot different than that? And I don't think it is in some ways. I think that we can learn from the story that, oh, this flood and drought, are happening, and the animals are being destroyed. The way the story tells us, animals were destroyed, and the flood destroying the earth, and global warming, maybe not global warming, but all of these anomalies that have violated our creation, right? And we hear the words of Genesis, the schemes of human devising are perpetually evil.
Talked about the animals being destroyed. Which animals are you talking about? Because in today's society, we love our animals. We take care of them.
Well, except that we don't. If you look at what that last slide was,
Those out in the wild, we don't necessarily take care of, but those that we care about and love and are with us all the time.
those are
Small in comparison.
our animals, right? That if we look at the global situation of all of the animals on the planet, could you go back to that last slide? Is it possible? Look at that. If we think of the birds and animals, all those nice little animals going into the ark, 39%.
Is on my.
39% of the species between, what is that? 80, 90, 2000, 2010, 40 years, in 40 years time, we've lost 39% of the birds in the animals on the planet. And, the little froggies and things like that, 76% of those, snakes, and that's amazing, right? And then marine species, fish, 39% of fish, because again, some of that because of the coral reefs being destroyed globally. So yes, we love our dogs and our cats, but when you think about the global animals, right? We probably need to cast the net, as it were, more broadly, right? Okay, go back to the next one. Yes, that's right, isn't it? Isn't it, Martha? Right. Mhm. Or even if it is like, or if my dog and your dog, and it might not be your problem, but you love dogs, I like dogs, but it's a bigger issue. Yes. Mhm. Right.
Some of them are new. When they kill some, and they're subsistence livers, when they kill something to eat,
Mhm.
they apologize to the animal, they give thanks for the animal's life, they use every last stitch of it to make
Yes.
something or
Yes.
they eat something.
Mhm.
Protect the bodies, they use everything. Some seasons they move. to another place.
Right.
They're constantly.
Well, Sylvia was raising that also last week, if you recall. And I mean, the thing about that, and again, to your point, Kim, we love our animals, but now I will confess that I am a meat eater. Not confess, I don't have to confess. I don't think it's a bad thing personally. But I have to, I think, as an act of Christian morality, understand where my meat comes from, and I don't know about any of you. I grew up not on a farm, but in a more rural area, and I saw, my father killing chickens. I saw my father hunting pheasants and deer, and I've seen deer, strung up on trees and dressed, you know. You then, if you have that in your mind, you understand the consciousness of what it is to kill an animal for food. And I think most of us don't have any sense of that.
That's not trophy hunting.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that is the
Elephant
purpose
riding.
of having, saying grace before we.
Yes,
eat. It's
yes.
not just to bless the food, it's to thank God for the sustenance that we've been given,
Mhm.
and hopefully to be more mindful of where it comes from and the people who put it, enable us to put it on our tables.
Mhm.
And if we take that more seriously, then maybe our attitudes will change.
But I don't think we can take it seriously because we are ignorant to the way animals are brought to us.
Mhm.
It's almost about one of my brother-in-law. Ever work in one place, you're very likely.
Mhm.
In the way that they pray. And then they get fed, and then the way they're slaughtered. Yeah,
Well, again, brings us back to Sylvia last week. She showed us those pictures, right? Yeah.
And she knows.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, you had firsthand of seeing it on the farm, but yet what you see on the farm is not what we're seeing as consumers of.
Right. We see it on a little
Totally different. Yeah.
little yellow styrofoam thing
Yeah.
wrapped in
Very sanitized, all very neat.
wrapped in cellophane, right? Wrapped in saran wrap.
Yeah, we were talking about being raised in a rural area. And both I and my mother were born in the city of Chicago. And when we were moving to California, we drove across country. And she would look out and she would say, "Oh, look at the pretty horses on the lane. Those are cows." Because she couldn't tell.
That's great.
difference between a horse and a cow, which explains to you how most urban people are.
Yes. Yes. Right.
with
Right.
animals.
Yeah.
But God said that he would not flood the earth again.
What-
Almost not the back door.
That I will not destroy the earth by flood. You got it, Jim. God's not going to do it, maybe, but we'll do it to ourselves, right? Because the schemes of human devising are perpetually evil, right? And the flood is a cautionary tale about human greed, selfishness, destructive habits, and environmental crises, including the one that we're in right now. Right?
But God has had some aha moments.
Yes. So, I think that, when we're talking about the animal stuff, again, species degradation is one thing, but then as you're saying, big ag meat production, right, is yet another element of that. And Sylvia last week showed us pictures of those feedlots, right? And hundreds of chickens. And the picture that always disturbs me are those pictures of the gestation crates with pigs that cannot move because, and they have to feed their babies through the gestation crate so that they won't roll over on them. And so that's why, okay, let me tell you, I'll give my own personal witness on, even though I'm a meat eater, what I have decided not to do and what I don't do. Even though sometimes it's a temptation to buy pork on sale, I don't do it. If I'm going to buy pork, and I know that I realize, and again, I realize my social location when I say this as a middle-class person, that if I'm going to buy pork, which I love, by the way, is, what's that? It's the other white meat. I'll only buy pork that is certified as is cage free. And you can find it. And now, and because people have been making this decision, you find it more and more in grocery stores, right? Because they know that the consumer is wanting that. So the more people who can afford it, who can make that decision, do it, the less expensive it's going to be for the rest of us to do it. So if you can do it, right.
I'm not sure that whether, I'm sure that some of the companies that say cage free are really, how many of them say it and are not?
Well, yeah, I don't know the answer to that, right? I mean, I can only do what I can do, right? And probably shouldn't eat pork at all because, pigs, by the way, if you don't know this about pigs, they're really smart animals. They're as smart as your dog is. And, and so to let them live their lives in such awful conditions is really inhumane. And so we have to really think, okay, how is this an act of Christian morality to eat the production of this immoral way of raising animals? Not to mention, when we think of that piece of pork that's sitting in that little case in the refrigerator, what were the conditions of the workers that produced that meat? And maybe we don't know that either, right?
Yeah, the parallel is produce, farm workers. Nobody ever thinks twice about how you got your salad, your fruit, your strawberries.
Mhm. 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 Right. We still live in empire, right? Yeah, yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Right. Mhm. Mhm. Well, because we don't have the chance that, we really, even though we can say this again and again, I'm not sure we really believe it. If we don't, we're, the sort of destructive warning that we get in the story is going to happen to us and is happening to us already. So when we see this story, it's not just like a story of long ago, like a little fairy tale. This is a mythic story. And when I say mythic story, it means a story that's profoundly true about some realities of the way the world works. And the earth rises up in judgment, I think, and it's what it's doing. The flood's not so much a punishment for God as the outcome of our actions, which is exactly what you were saying, Jim, right? That we keep up what we're doing, we will reap the harvest. And we, I know I don't always keep that in my mind, and we're supposed to be, as Christians, the new creation people, right? We're the people of the rainbow. We're supposed to be the people that say, oh, there is a different way, right? That's who we ought to be, right? So Noah is an example of ecological foresight. So we're the Noahs, right? We're the people who say, let's try to preserve the species, right? Let's try to. Right. Mhm. Mhm. So that's why you think about, all those poor people who didn't make it in the ark. Well, Could we see that as a metaphor for all the people who refuse to believe that they didn't get in the ark because they didn't think there was any problem, right? So that's the metaphor I think that we can take with us from that story about we need to be Noahs. We need to wake up, right, and realize what's happening, and engage in practices that are going to save the planet in some way, right? In the story of Noah, it's the ark, but maybe we need to make the earth into an ark, right? To try to transform what we're doing, and to remember that God has made a covenant with all flesh. And when we see the rainbow, that's a sign of hope, but it's only a sign of hope if we're willing to do something about it, right? Does. Mhm. It is, right? I mean, and that's what I think scientists are telling us, that even more than they thought, it was, things that are accelerating at such a pace that even, so you wonder also, and this, I hate to sound like, am I sounding like I'm Amish or something when I say this? But it may be the case that we may have to develop ark communities, become collectives of new creation, right? And I'm not saying today or tomorrow, but it might be the case in the future, right? That the world is such that we need to be, that Christians need to be, develop art communities that become sort of like prototypes of how we ought to be living in the world,
You're
right?
talking like a kibbutz almost.
Like a what?
Kibbutz.
Yes, yeah, maybe that's a kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Still be in isolation in a sense, because you still have
Yeah.
greater
The greater world. So maybe being an image to the rest of the world about, which is what Christians ought to be anyways, right? We're supposed to be lights on the hill.
when God promised not to destroy the earth with water, somewhere in the Bible it talks about the next is going to be the fire.
Well, there is Jeremiah, if I don't have my, again, I should have not just had my Torah version with me, but
What I'm thinking in terms of that is,
mhm.
are we not being consumed right now?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's
in the whole realm of things, look at how the earth is, things are being affected right now. The fire is always starting.
Mhm. And the floods though too. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Noah, and actually, because it's mythical, we don't know what overnight meant there either.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's something it's already happening.
Mhm.
It's happening around us.
And so that's why, remember the floodwaters, they were already starting, right? When they, so that's the same kind of image. Yeah, Jim?
We had come from the same question about preserving the longer the environment. And I brought in this Time magazine, we talked about fusion. Fusion will arrive.
Well, there's lots of candidates for destruction. Unfortunately, not to put too fine a point on it. But what, in our remaining few minutes, that last question there, what images from the story speak to you was there anything that, other images in this story that speak out to you either for hope or for warning? What is the hope for you in the story, Jim? Say that again, I'm sorry. Oh, as long as there's a bird that seeks out life? Yeah, yeah, so that image of the dove that flies out and comes back with just one little sprig in its mouth, yeah. Yeah, there were, you mean in terms of the extinction species? Yeah, there were extinct birds, I think, several of them. I can't remember what they were. One of them was a kind of woodpecker. I don't know what else. Yeah. And there was only one of several that they realized were that. Yep.
Over the summer, I did a staycation.
Uh-huh.
I went to Malibu Lagoon. And the lagoon is very interesting. It's so much different than the actual beach in terms of what you see on there. And there's a dock that leads down to the water by the lagoon. And I was sitting there with my camera and I was taking pictures, birds and ducks and things like that. But what I noticed is all the little fishes, the little things in the wade pools, and how much life there was there. It was teeming with just little fish and other little animals and bugs, and it was all existing there. And the water wasn't murky. It was really peaceful and really serene. And it was kind of like stepping back in time. It was like I had stepped away from Los Angeles altogether in this little area. And it's like, this is the way it's supposed to be, and the birds were eating the animals in the water, and everything was in harmony. It was what it was supposed to be. So that even in all the chaos that's outside, because right outside was PCH and it was loud and
Right.
everything was going on, there was this little sanctuary, this little place of peace, quiet, and a perfect order, and that we need to find that.
Well, that's the word shalom, right? And the root of that word is about bringing order out of chaos. Is that's where it sort of comes from, right? And so when we greet each other with that word of shalom, that's like, it's not just peace, but it's the order of the universe, right? The good order of all things, that we're wishing. The God's vision for the planet, really, in some sense, is what we're bringing. We wish one another, right? And so when Jews on Sabbath wish each other Shabbat Shalom, that's what they're wishing, right? That the thing that we envision in the Sabbath day, that sort of peace of the Sabbath, which is God's peace, for a dream for the whole of creation, right? So I think that's the last slide. Kelsey, is that the last slide? Sorry, Kelsey. I think that's the last slide. Yeah, okay. So I think that leaves us to where we are. And so we can sign off on the Zoom room at this point. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, everybody who's here. I think we've